If it works, it works. No, no one's tomorrow. Oh my God. This makes my day.
How about the church? Hi at home, everything going okay? Somebody could say yes. Say yes. Oh, thank you very much. Oh. Okay. How's that? Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Hello. Nice to see you all again. I'm going to start off with a little anecdote today. My 83, 84-year-old parents decided last year that they would become a Lutheran after being Catholic for 82 years. And I like to bother them about that. I don't really care one way or another. So I bother them about that in two different ways. One is I ask them why they are schismatics, why they're splitters, why they're, essentially why they've left the one true faith and have gone to something which is, a sinful faith. And they try to explain that to me, and I'm not really listening. The other one is I tell them that God is dead, which is actually something that I say a lot, just in inappropriate, moments. I was at a family gathering, and they're like, let's all gather, let's all hold hands, pretty close, and say grace or say a prayer. And then I would say, what? Haven't you heard? God is dead. It's a Nietzsche quote. We'll get to that in the late 19th century. I just like to poke people, and upset them a little bit.
Why did they become Lutheran?
Exactly, that's what I asked them. That's what I asked them.
That seems like the most backwards thing.
Well, ask Luther. He would tell you why. There are no more indulgences, and a lot of the corruption we'll talk about today doesn't really apply anymore. But it's just a fun thing to bother them about. And they'll say things like, "Well, do Lutherans believe in Christmas?" And just stuff like that. Right? They love me in spite of all of that. The church. The church is, before the Reformation, really the church is from the medieval period all the way through about 1800, 1900, so extremely important. And it is, as you know, it's one of the three estates. It's the first estate. The people who belong to the clergy have their own social class. They belong, no matter their wealth or anything like that, they belong to this social class, the clergy. And within that class, there's a hierarchy, right? Who's at the very top of the Catholic clergy? The Pope, right? And then you've got Pope, and then you have cardinals, and you have bishops, and you have different kinds of priests and monks and so on, going all the way down. It's a class apart. not a part of the wealth kind of system that we have, nowadays. It is also a supranational organization. It's the one thing in sort of early modern European history that goes beyond borders. There are some new monarchies, right? But the thing that is overarching, the thing that includes everyone, until we have a number of different churches, is this one kind of supranational organization. It is truly the center of people's lives. You can't possibly believe how central this is to the life of an individual believer. The calendar, time itself is religious. So, individual days or years are counted from the alleged birth of Jesus. And individual days are only important in the sense that a given day is Sunday, or a given day is a holy day, or a holiday of some kind. And so the people of Europe know what time it is, so to speak, only in terms of religion. And as you know, for a really long period of time, getting into heaven is a main concern of almost everybody. Who are the first people, though, who start to maybe move away from that idea of just being obsessed with getting into heaven and avoiding hell? Perfect. Italian Renaissance people. Good. They start to look for different ways of living and truly come up with rebirths. So, getting into heaven is a main concern. The Catholic Church at this point in time is very obsessed with how to deal with sin. In fact, how to deal with sin seems to be the very reason for the existence of this church. There's this idea that man is sinful and that sin needs to be overcome by help from the church. The way that it was done originally, so to speak, everybody's damned, and then Jesus comes, and Jesus dies for people's sins. Because Jesus self-sacrificed, when he did that, he made it possible for all these people who are innately sinful and not perfect to have the chance of salvation. And it's the church then that kind of manages that experience, or manages Jesus' death, and helps people latch onto that and then get salvation. The church comes up with, over time, a number of sacraments. Sacraments being sacred things, very special sacred things that the church has control over, that the church then either gives to people or has people do or offers to people if they choose to take that path. The 7 sacraments are baptism. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of explain what each one of these things is so that everybody is on the same page. Baptism is essentially coming into contact with water that's been blessed, holy water. And this happens to babies as soon as possible. It's believed for a long period of time that if a baby doesn't come in contact with this holy water, that if the child isn't baptized, the child is not accepted into the Christian or Catholic faith, and therefore if that baby died, it probably wouldn't burn in hell. That would be awful. But it might go to a place called purgatory, a place which is kind of like neither heaven nor hell. It's pretty boring. You don't want a baby to spend the rest of eternity there. And let's face it, lots of babies died at birth or pre-birth or post-birth around this period of time. So it's really imperative that a baby gets baptized as soon as possible. Another one that comes up over time is something called confession. Now it has a nicer name, reconciliation. But confession is really what one is doing. One needs to go to a priest and confess what they've done. Confess the sins that they remember. The priest will kind of counsel that person. The priest will then tell them what kind of penance or punishment they need to do in order to, get right with Jesus, or have, once again, the ability to get into heaven. So you need to go and confess your sins. It kind of clears the slate for a while. You sin some more, you need to go back and clear the slate again. The Eucharist is, I keep forgetting about that. The Eucharist is a reenactment of the Last Supper, where Jesus is giving out wine and he's giving out bread, and he says to his followers and his disciples that this bread that they're eating is his body, or is symbolic of his body, and that they should take it, eat it, and so after his death, they start to basically do the same kind of thing, where a priest is handing out bread to the people who are going to church services. The priest at this point in time is not giving out wine to everybody. Wine is reserved for the priest. The priest is drinking the wine, which is symbolic of the blood of Jesus that he poured out. So the Eucharist is, or going to Mass, going to church service, and then seeing that and taking part of this bread. It's kind of like reenacting the sacrifice of Jesus. So once again, helping you get into heaven. Confirmation is just confirming that your baptism, something that was put upon you, you're confirming that you want to become a Christian, that you want to become Catholic. At this point in time, too, or over time, they decided that marriage was a holy sacrament, that the church should have control over marriage as well. For a long time, we don't think about this, for a long time, people were just, making agreements with each other to be married or to be man and wife. The church wants to take control over that, and they do that at some point in time. It might have solved some social problems, actually.
Is that why you need a priest to get married?
That's why in the church you need a priest to get married, because it's a sacrament. It's something special. It's a special gift from the church for Catholic. So I could tell my parents that their marriage is no longer valid, which would make me. Never mind. We'll go beyond that. They're probably calling me that anyway. So marriage is a sacrament. Holy orders. This is becoming a clergy person. This is becoming a priest, a monk, a nun. It's like being married to the church, or like being married to Jesus. It's something special. It's something holy. The priest is not like normal people. They are a special person. They are closer to God because they've given up their entire existence in order to serve as, a servant of God, and they're helping people get into heaven. So holy orders are becoming a priest. And then finally, there's something called last rites or extreme unction. And this is a kind of paving the way into death. A kind of praying for sick people, praying for dying people, helping them maybe confess for the very last time, helping them get their mind right as they pass on into the next life. Does all that make sense? Do you have any questions about any of them? Yes.
If you're going to become a priest, or
I'm not, but go ahead.
Hypothetically, yes. Would you have to be a virgin or not married?
No. Yes. Depends on the time. So that also becomes something of an innovation of the church. That the rule of celibacy, or the rule of not being married, is something that develops over time, probably having to do with inheritance of property and that sort of thing. But it also goes along with this idea of holy orders, that a priest needs to concentrate just on the relationship with God and not a relationship with another person. It's hard to enforce. For a long period of time, there are priests who do have partners, and they try to, from time to time, they try to put put their thumb down on things and get that to fix. But for a really long period of time, there's some problems with that. Other questions? Want to see some art? Do you think that is Renaissance art or pre-Renaissance art?
Pre-Renaissance.
Certainly the subject matter is religious.
Does that lady have double ones?
That lady has an interesting medieval hairstyle.
Is that hairstyle?
Uh-huh. There are several sacraments. I'm not sure if I can find all 7. Do you see baptism, though?
Yeah.
Do you see where baptism is in relation to the other sacraments? Does this make sense to you from a sort of pre-Renaissance art sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay, it's about time, right? Closer, farther away. And do you see at the very, let's say, end of time, what we have going on for sacrament? It's old people, right? So front left, we've got baptism, and then far right, we've got what I believe is extreme unction or last rites. Hopefully they're not dying, but who really knows at this point in time? So you've got some people baptizing a baby, and then I see a couple of different paths to go. Maybe you can kind of see those paths too as we move to the right. Do you see the dog? And there's a dog. You can tell me it looks like a goat or something.
Yeah, it looks like a goat.
Oh, it's a nice dog. That is, I think. Well, which one do you think it is? Which of the seven? The things to the, if you're looking at to the right of the dog. Combination.
Close enough to be confession.
Which one? Eucharist? It's not Eucharist.
I don't think there'd be a dog at the Last Supper.
There's a reason for the dog, by the way.
Did he sing it?
No. You're not good at interpreting it.
Dog's a sin.
That's right. So that's a family. Do you see the family?
Oh.
And family is, what's the sacrament? Marriage. Good. So this is probably marriage, and the dog is, the dog's name is Fido. Yes. Fido means I am faithful.
Oh, the opposite.
Yeah, he's hanging out there with the family because this is a faithful family and a family that where the husband and wife are faithful to each other. That's the reason for the dog. I think what we have then are a couple of different young men. One of them has an interesting haircut, and then the other one is the other one seems to be. I'm not sure if he's blindfolded or he seems to be sorry for something. Yeah. So the one on the farther one on the right is confession. I'm going to go with the one on the left, the guy who's in the red robe with the funny haircut. The funny haircut is a kind of haircut that they used to give clergymen for a long period of time. It's called a tonsure. Essentially, they cut a bald spot in the top of your head, and then sort of have just a ring of hair, and then kind of shave things below that. So that's probably holy orders. That's probably confession, and then we have extreme unction. The Eucharist perhaps is, I don't see it there, but perhaps too important to The church is, over time, comes up with a lot of ideas or traditions, things like the seven sacraments. And one of the things that they come up with, in order to help people with their faith, is the idea of saints. Saints are people who live exemplary religious lives. And saints are treated with reverence, but then saints are also prayed to. In later, the existence of saints will be criticized as almost like polytheism, many gods. Like these different saints that people could be praying to in heaven would have different concerns or would be associated with different occupations. So there would be a patron saint of teachers, or a patron saint of soldiers, or a patron saint of barrel makers. And if you were in those occupations, they would be your special saint that you could perhaps pray to for whatever. Let's say I'm trying to get a really good lesson plan going. I'm praying to the patron saint of teachers, and that person would help you out.
Wasn't Santa Saint?
Saint Nicholas is also a saint. Yeah, he's also a saint. There's all kinds of official saints and unofficial saints, and people rely on them to find lost things, or there's a saint that helps women through pregnancy and childbirth. So doing things to that saint might help that saint help you out, according to the church. There's also this idea that Mary, the mother of Jesus, oftentimes over time called the Virgin Mary, because it's a virgin birth, according to the church doctrine, that she is something special too. She's like a very special saint that a lot of people start to gravitate towards around the year 1000. Mary sort of gets elevated by the church and by the people to something very special. That kind of makes sense to me, and maybe this makes sense to you. Psychologically speaking, and this is maybe true for about 80% of us, psychologically speaking, to have a kind of goddess figure that you could come to with your concerns and your problems and saying sorry for whatever sin it is that you committed, it seems like a female figure is easier to go to and quote unquote, confess your sins or ask for help. Does that make sense? Whereas a male kind of figure, a God kind of figure, is maybe a little bit scarier, psychologically speaking. Yes? Like if you, I'm recording all this. It's public. Let's say you ran over the neighbor's cat, and you had to tell somebody. Do you go to dad or do you go to mom to tell them that you ran over the neighbor's cat?
Dad.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Well, at this period, I think a lot of people prefer to go to mom. And so going to Mary with your concerns and worries and sense just seems to be easier. That she becomes almost, as I say, a kind of democratic figure. Relics are really quite popular, and this comes out of it's sort of an odd cultural thing that happens. But relics are pieces of saints, oftentimes, or allegedly something to do with a biblical story. So what we can see here are a couple of containers, and inside are bones. These are the bones of, let's say, a saint. And it could be any part of them, really. Sometimes it's an entire head of a person. And the idea is that these are actual relics or actual pieces of that living person. And you could go, the idea is you could go and be close to it, think about that person, think about how the lives that they led, and so on and so forth, and be inspired by that, lead a better life and so on. But what happens over time is it becomes rather magical. Kind of like with the saints and Mary, the relics become a kind of magical thing that you want to come close to. And by coming close to it, a miracle could happen, and you could be healed of something, or your problem would go away. So people are literally going on pilgrimages, religious journeys, to go and visit pieces of long dead saints. And then they are getting a kind of, over time, kind of like getting God points for it. I'll kind of explain that in just a minute when we come up with this idea. But it's good to go to the other things that exist as relics beyond just real pieces of human flesh are some really kind of sketchy things sometimes that come out of the Middle East and get brought into Europe, and wealthy people collect these things. Kings and princes and so on are collecting these things, and different churches are collecting these too. Things like angel feathers, or the Holy Grail, the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper, or the spear tip that pierced his side when he was on the cross, or pieces of the cross itself, or pieces of Noah's Ark, or just all these kinds of things. I can say something microscopic, but Mary's milk. Mary's milk in the little vials. No, I don't know why people don't say, well, how did they collect this? Or whatever. They don't really think about that. They just like, I'm so close to it. I can almost touch it. I'm thinking about it. Finally, the devil and sin. People literally believe in a devil who is the opposite of God, who's spending all of his time trying to trick people, trap people, make them sin. The devil made me do it in order to get them to join his kingdom, of hell. So people believe in a literal devil, and they believe that the more you sin, the more likely it is that you end up with him in hell, burning for all eternity. So you better go visit those relics, and you better pray to the right saints. You better be good. There seems to be a new belief, once again around the year, 1100, 1200, 1000, called purgatory. We know heaven, we know hell. There's this new place called purgatory. It might have been created because people were plagued by ghosts. And the local clergy would say to people, there's no such thing as ghosts. That's a silly belief. There is a place called purgatory that everybody goes to when they die. Well, maybe some people go directly to hell. But many people go to purgatory. And purgatory is the place where people are purified before they go to heaven. Here's the problem. People go to confession and they get their sins taken away. They do what they're supposed to do and their sins are taken away. However, a lot of people forget a lot of the sins that they do, or maybe they just don't say it was so terrible the thing that they did that they didn't want to confess it, and at the last minute they decided not to. They got these sins weighing them down. They need to go to this waiting room to be purified to eventually get into heaven. And people who were there, it was said over time, could be helped. They could be helped by the people on earth who still loved them and cared for them and wanted to help them. And so they would maybe pray for them. And pray for my deceased uncle who's in purgatory. And by praying for him, he's going to get out of purgatory faster. Or you could have somebody, you could pay the priest to say mass for that person's intention. Once again, getting them out of purgatory faster. You could go on a pilgrimage. You could come in contact with relics. By doing these things for someone else, you're trying to get them out of purgatory. And finally, there's this wonderful thing that was created called indulgences. And indulgences are pieces of paper. I'll show you this in a second. The pieces of paper that you get in order to help somebody get out of purgatory. Yes. It is kind of an in-between hell and heaven. It is a kind of waiting room.
No pain, but no harm.
Correct. So it's pretty, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time there.
But you end up going to one or the other.
You end up probably going to heaven because if you're bad and you're being purified, you're not going to go to hell. You're probably just bad enough to go to hell right away. So it's a bunch of people waiting to get into heaven, being purified. Here it is, a church document to shorten your time in purgatory. And by the way, this may not shock you, but look at it. It's a document. It's written on paper. And imagine this. Imagine they came up with a device that made it easier to copy things. A printing press. So you can imagine that before the printing press, indulgences were not very common. Because they'd have to handwrite it, they'd have to have it on vellum, on skins. And now with the printing press, when approximately is the printing press developed? Do we know that? 14 something, right? And so imagine after that, the church can now print indulgences, and they can create a much larger trade in indulgences. They're going to be either, they're going to be more widely available, so they might be more widely annoying if you hate them and think they're wrong. People began to believe that indulgences were not just for the people in purgatory. They were starting to believe that, and sometimes they were sold this way, that indulgences could overrule going to confession. You could buy a piece of paper from an indulgence seller instead of doing the hard work of going to a priest and saying, I ran over my neighbor's cat, or whatever it happens to be. And you no longer then would have to pay a kind of penance. The priest might say to you, that's an awful thing to do. You have to, replace that cat. Go to your neighbor, give them a new cat, and say you're sorry. I don't want to do that. I want them to know that I ran over the cat. So that's what people start to believe. Go ahead.
Are you just asking for people to make indulgences
I would say that probably never happened. because the printers are doing this for the church, right? It's not a church printing, but they're making money off of that, and then the church is selling these things to people, like a priest selling it to a person, or really they oftentimes have special indulgence sellers. That's all they do. A monk whose job is to travel around wherever and sell these specific indulgences. So it would be a great, it would be a great scam, but I just don't think it happened. You know the Babylonian captivity?
Never.
What is the Babylonian captivity? That's what they call it. It has nothing to do with.
Someone being held in Babylon.
Look at the dates. It's a number of years when the church wasn't in Rome. It's in a different town called Avignon. That's bad. Rome is the capital of Christian Europe. Rome is where St. Paul is martyred, or St. Peter is martyred. It's just, it's the holy city. And to leave the holy city in the year 1309 just seems really wrong. It also seems like we're starting to see the very beginnings of nationalism of different kingdoms, vying with other kingdoms for power. Avignon is more like France. So it's thought that the popes, by the way, who were all French at this point in time, all those years, 7 successive popes, or 5, or however many it was, they're all French guys. And people who are not French are starting to think, hey, the papacy is sort of, it belongs to France. They don't like that very much. French popes in Avignon. That's what it looks like. It's really quite nice. They spent a lot of time and money just doing church bureaucracy and not concentrating on saving souls. The Pope still controls the papal states. They wax and wane in size depending on how many armed forces the Pope has and whether he's able to take over a town or not. And who the Pope is. But yeah, it's quite a bit of territory within. So the Great Schism is a greater problem than the Avignon papacy. Avignon papacy, people moving up to France, that's fine. Eventually, the Pope moves back to Rome. And when the Pope moved back to Rome, they had this problem called the Great Schism. You might remember the first schism was the Greek Church splitting from the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church splitting from the Catholic Church. This Great Schism occurs in 1378, and we won't get into the specifics, but there were 2 popes. And we might have talked about this a little bit before. When there are 2 popes, one of them is the real pope, and the other one is the anti-pope. The real pope works for God to get you into heaven, and the anti-pope works for the devil to get you into hell. And so people, not individual people, but rulers for the most part, were making the decision of which pope to follow, and either saving or damning their people as they did that. It's really pretty disconcerting to think that, you don't know whether you are following the right pope or not. This lasts for many years with, sort of dueling popes. A pope would die and a new pope would be elected by one group. And so for a number of years, you've got 2 popes. They decided to fix this problem by calling a council, a church council. Get all the bigwigs from the church together, discuss, debate, and come up with a solution to this. They do this. They elect a new pope, and now they have 3 popes for a short period of time. Now people only had a 1 out of 3 chance of following the right pope, and a 2 out of 3 chance of following the anti-pope. Oh, Satan, you're so tricky. The council then got 2 popes to quit, and there was only 1 pope. This whole great schism is over about 1417 or so. And the council says, wow, we dealt with that problem. Let's deal with all the other problems of the church too right now. And the new pope, a guy by the name of Martin, says, no, I got it from here, guys. It's fine. You go home. I'll run things. And they're like, are you sure? Because there's kind of a number of problems. I got it. It's fine. This is an issue or a movement called the conciliar movement. And here's the question. Who is greater? Or who gets to make the final decision? Is it the Pope who's the head of the church, or a council of cardinals and bishops who elected him to be Pope? Can you take back, once you've elected somebody to be Pope, Can you not like them and say, you're not Pope anymore, we're putting somebody else in?
What's the cardinal's role in the church?
The cardinals are the second rung, after the Pope, the cardinals are sort of the second rung of hierarchy who vote on the Pope. They elect the Pope. So, who do you like? Is it a more strictly absolute monarchy, or is there sort of a representative element of the cardinals? Over time, you might know it gets decided that the Pope is the guy in charge. Period. That rolls on today. Here's some problems with the church. These are the problems. Maybe these problems are what they were trying to solve with the conciliar movement or the Council of Constance. One of the problems is conflict with secular rulers. This is pretty normal if you think about it. When the church was a supranational organization, and there were church laws and church rules, and the Pope was making pronouncements, and local clergy people would tell people what the Pope wanted, and people would just follow that. That's all well and good until new monarchs come along, or monarchs in general, who say, well, wait a second, this is my kingdom. I get to decide some things. I get to be the secular ruler, and the Pope is just the religious ruler. That goes back and forth. Who's on top? And it's not completely resolved for a long period of time. There's also the problem of money flowing to the papacy. You might notice that the men who buy their way into the papacy, literally, they buy the votes of the cardinals at this point in time, are Renaissance rulers or Renaissance princes. They like to live in the here and the now. They like wealth. They like power. They like conquering other cities to increase their territory. So these are real Renaissance men doing Renaissance things. Simony is a problem. Simony is when you buy a church office. So somebody who is a wealthy nobleman decides that they want to be bishop of a place, and they say, Your Eminence, I'd love to buy this bishopric of Munster. And the Pope would say, okay, it's yours for the low price of such and such amount, and then people would buy that. That could go for somebody who's even like a local priest who is in control of 2 or 3 or 4 different churches. Every single one of those churches is bringing in money, and so they might want to pay whoever's in charge of making or appointing the priest of that place. There's just a lot of money that's flowing in this. Pluralism is when somebody has multiple church offices. How can you be bishop of 2 places or 3 places? Which one of these places are you going to ignore? Are you going to be wandering around, visiting different cathedrals 3 months out of the year to be bishop of all these different places? That kind of thing happens. Absenteeism happens. People are bishop of, a guy is bishop of 3 or 4 different places. He only stays at the cathedral that's the nicest. He never shows up to the other ones. There's a story of a guy who was bishop of a place, and for like 20 years, people had never seen him. He dies. They bring him to the cathedral, and people are like, oh, that's what he looked like. I always wondered the last 20 years. So absentee is a problem. Nepotism is a problem too. Nepotism is when a churchman gives a church office, like a bishopric, to a relative. So they have nephews. Nepos is the Greek word for nephew. And they might say, I'm Pope. I'm going to give this cardinal hat to my nephew, and this other nephew I'm going to give this bishopric to. They'll make a lot of money off of it. Sometimes they give church offices to their children or grandchildren. Yes, they're not supposed to have children or grandchildren. Yet, with clerical immorality, with the difficulty of giving up, celibacy, that sometimes happen. In fact, who was that? There is a Borgia Pope, and Alexander made his 3-year-old grandson, maybe son, a cardinal's hat. And 3-year-old cardinals make terrible, yeah, a 3-year-old saying terrible cardinal. Always crying and stuff. Terrible priest. So, clerical immorality is going on in the Renaissance. Clerical ignorance is going on in the Renaissance too. A lot of the clergy aren't educated well enough to do what they need to do in order to help people. They don't speak Latin well enough. They can't say the prayers correctly. They don't know enough about theology, and they can't help people out. So you have all these conflicts like popes versus kings, and clergy members versus in other words, if you are a clergy person, if you are a priest, you are both part of this church hierarchy, but then you're also the subject of the king. So sometimes you have to decide, who do you listen to? If Henry VIII says to Thomas More, I'm starting my own church, you have to go along with it. And the Pope is basically telling Thomas More, Henry is doing the wrong thing. He's going to be damned. He's a sinner. Who does Thomas More listen to? Does he listen to his king? Or does he listen to his faith in his Pope? More goes against the grain. He goes with the Pope. He gets his head chopped off. Most people just went along with the king. There's a bunch of people who are, you don't have to write all of this stuff down, but I just kind of want to give you an example of a couple of guys who are pre-Reformation kinds of people. We read about them in that Charles L. Lee article about the Black Plague. John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, an Englishman and a Bohemian or a Czech guy, both start to preach in the vernacular. They start to read the Bible from Latin and then tell people what it says in the language that the people can understand, reading directly from the Bible. Looking at the Bible, sola scriptura, and saying, this is the Word of God. What we believe should only be in the Bible. We shouldn't add a bunch of new stuff. If it doesn't say in the Bible that there should be saints, there shouldn't be saints. Or if it doesn't say that you should look at relics, there shouldn't be relics. So they start to look at the Pope's power over, secular things, the papal states. They start to look at saints. They start to look at relics and pilgrimages. And most of the sacraments as just nonsense or bunk or innovations of the church that shouldn't exist. In England, this causes a peasants' revolt. People who were peasants started to think, we don't have to listen to the church so much anymore. We don't have to listen to our social betters anymore. Let's have a revolt. They get crushed. This also happens in Bohemia with this thing called the Hussite Wars, where Jan Hus was invited to a council to explain himself. Hey, Jan Hus, come and tell the Pope and these cardinals what you believe. And he goes and he does that. And they say, by the way, guarantee no harm will come to you. You get a safe conduct pass. And he goes and he explains these things. And they say, never mind about the safe conduct pass. You are an evil sinner that's causing people to believe your nonsense, to go to hell with you. So they put this cap on him, and then they execute him and they burn him. Well, they execute him by burning. And then they scatter his ashes so that people will never see him ever again. That causes the people who believed these things to have a war, and they're eventually kind of successful in defending their religion. Once again, we don't need to write all of this down. Just know that there are people in the Northern Renaissance who are pious. People who are interested in improving the church, improving society. People like Erasmus. And lay people, normal people who want to act like monks and nuns, who want to act like clergy people without actually being clergy people. They're helping the poor, they're helping educate people. They're continuing their regular jobs, but they're living like Jesus wants them to. There's this group called the Brothers and Sisters of Common Life, for example. And of course, it's like those bands that you see with the What Would Jesus Do? They're doing that. Good. What questions do you have? Yes.
Why is it called Simon?
It's called Simon because there was a guy by the name of, I think, Simon the Magician, who liked what St. Paul was doing. Paul was healing people and doing miracles, and this guy says to Paul, "Hey, show me how to do what you do. Show me your tricks." And Paul says, "It's not a trick. You can't buy your way into